I Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know that discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. This episode's brought to you by John Farron, a realtor with Home Smart Lifestyles in Queen Creek, Arizona. A retired police sergeant, John continues to help the community as he assists families with the sale or purchase of their homes in the Phoenix metro area. Whether you're a first-time home buyer, a seasoned investor, or somewhere in between, John has the experience, knowledge, and ability to safely guide you through the process. For a free, no-obligation consult, you can reach John at 480-458-7399, on the internet at www.eastvalleyproperties.net, or see him on YouTube at East Valley Properties with John Farron. Welcome back to I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Buncher, and today I've got Jay in the studio with me to help me out with another episode, if you want to say hey.
Good morning.
And we're going to try something a little different. We kind of alluded to this the last episode or two ago. I'm not really sure when we kind of did a little harder solicit for, some questions or comments from folks. And we ended up getting quite a few of them actually. So that was good. And I appreciate folks doing that. So we're going to play off of that today. And with that in mind, tonight's episode is going to be called Not Donnie Brasco. Not Donnie Brasco. So the impetus or the crux of this one is from a comment from Jeff. And he wrote, I'm going to read this. This must have been after Fossil Creek. Great Fossil Creek episode. You and Jay asked for ideas. I would love to know something about the lifestyle of an undercover officer. I think most civilians like me think of Donnie Brasco. He was FBI when that subject comes up. Some real life stories, the lengths gone to make it work, and the effect on your personal lives and relationships, which I actually think is a really good question. And there's a ton of material here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to.
Yeah, there's a ton of material here. So I think what we do need to do is, since Donnie Brasco's going back a little bit, can you give a quick overview of like who and what is a Donnie Brasco? What's he referring to?
Well, my memory of Donnie Brasco was only what I saw in the movies. It was a feature film done decades ago about a FBI agent. And honestly, I don't even know if his true name was Donnie Brasco. Do you?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't know if it was his character's name or the real version of the FBI agent. But nevertheless, Donnie Brasco played that character, whether it was himself, a real name, or a fictitious name. The movie was about an agent who worked his way into the mafia by just coming into the fringe of the organization and being accepted by various members of the organization. And he was so good at working undercover that his successes just kept leading to more work and a climb deeper and higher within the organization, to a point where he was traveling up and down the East Coast, if I remember right, back and forth from New York to Florida, just like a tick burrowed into a dog, working the aspects of this criminal enterprise.
Okay. And I mean, that's pretty much what I remember. And what we're going to chat about is the fact that thing is what I would call, I don't know if it's the right term, but it's more of like a deep immersion, 100% immersion undercover operation.
100%. Very detrimental to a family, if you have a family, and the individual, whoever that might be, that's working that undercover assignment.
Yeah,
so
I would agree.
It's rare. It's a rare assignment or a rare project that you have somebody doing that.
And I would say, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I would say it almost probably doesn't happen anymore.
I don't think so.
Because, again, we'll touch on it a little more, but we are personally aware of a few of these type of full immersion, undercover immersion operations. I just don't know that I'm sure they do. Obviously they do, but I don't believe it's for the reasons that you just stated, the detrimental effects. Sometimes the cases actually are not so great once it's all said and done.
It's a very fine line law enforcement is dancing on when they attempt to do a project that involves this deep cover immersion, total immersion into whatever criminal syndicate organization that they're looking at. You know, the risks and the problems usually outweigh the benefit derived from whatever the case is, whatever they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think, see, we're already, I wasn't even planning on getting into this quite yet, but the one thing that I throw out there is when you start talking about an investigation of that type is that person, that man or woman is put under an enormous stress and strain. And strictly from the aspect of a criminal prosecution, they're put into positions where they're expected to commit a crime. And when you're expected to commit a crime as a cop, you basically can't. But somehow you as the UC, the undercover, you have to figure out ways to either dance around it, do it, don't do it. And depending on the jurisdiction, the end game, et cetera, cops are allowed to commit a crime on occasion here and there. But the problem is no matter what it is, when it comes to prosecution, that's the first thing that gets flagged is, well, you allowed your cop to commit X crime. And it just looks terrible.
It's terrible. There's no jury appeal to it. How do you justify allowing a member of law enforcement to break a law, no matter how insignificant that law may be, outside of speeding or, driving if he had a few many drinks at, the bikers clubhouse? It's the risk and the negative effects of that coming to light really don't warrant even attempting what used to be done quite frequently.
I would agree with that. Yeah. And again, I think that's what lends itself to these types of investigations not occurring so much anymore. But again, we're going to get back into that. The one thing I forgot to mention is there is I did and Jay's aware of this, but I did a taping and I guess a Q&A with a reporter. She does a podcast that's called True Crime Arizona. I think it's available on most of the directories, but I think by the time this episode, not Donnie Brasco, is aired and made available, I think that will be available as well. So on this True Crime Arizona, what they do is they entertain cases that are relevant to Arizona, solved, unsolved, just high-profile stuff. And Jay and I could probably name the majority of the ones they've either done or they're going to do because we're from Arizona. So the case that they called me in on has to do with a police sergeant who was found dead under mysterious circumstances. That's the best way I'll put it. Yeah. But so I want to throw that out there because if you're interested in that, I think it'll probably be pretty interesting. I haven't heard it yet. They're still working on it and everything, but it's the True Crime Arizona podcast, and it'll be the episode on Sergeant Drenth with Phoenix PD. So totally wanted to put that in the front end.
Well, it's a significant case with a lot of questions still yet to be answered.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And I enjoy, and when they reached out to me to provide the information from, I guess, the law enforcement perspective, I was pretty interested in doing it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not so much interested in some of the stuff they reach out on, but when they reached out for that, I thought that was a pretty good one. But all right, sorry for that little deviation sidetrack. So we're back to, we're going to touch on like the full immersion UC pitfalls, advantages in a bit. And I think what's probably more interesting, and again, because neither Jay nor I ever worked what I'd call that full deep immersion type of UC stuff. We did what about 99% of UC work really is.
I think so.
Dipping in and out of things, dipping in and out of cases. Jay has much more experience with the UC stuff with regard to some dope, escort stuff, prostitution stuff. I had experience with that as well, but mine is much more so on the management side. Because when I was in the first time as a detective, I had some of those experiences, but much more of my time dealt with managing.
Which I think will help answer Jeff's questions a little bit better, speaking at it from a line level.
Yeah.
Undercover guy versus...
Jay's going to give you the cool, fun stuff that's exciting, and I'm going to give you the oh shit, worry wart, oh crap, do we intervene or not, do I allow it side. So I'll give you the boring side.
Well, it was always much more fun on my side than your side.
Well, I agree with it, and we talked about that too. Definitely would always take being the UC side of the operation versus the guys that are running cover and or managing, for sure. So let's get into it. What do we work UC for? What do we do in UC work for?
Well, there's certain jobs that can't be done unless you're wearing a pair of Levi's and a T-shirt and not a uniform. So mostly undercover work is just done to investigate crimes that you can't stumble into as a patrolman or a traffic officer. Not traffic. They're specifically related to drugs, prostitution, property crimes where there might be a fence involved. If somebody steals your TV and they're going to do something to your TV to convert it to cash to go buy some drugs. So there's our detectives in all agencies across the nation that are assigned to go and try to recover your TV, try to find your TV before it ends up being destroyed or sold to a fence. And we can get a hand-to-hand sale on you before you go buy your drugs. And we can solve crimes by acting like we're criminals, alongside you. So that's basically the essence of undercover work.
And so would you agree that, I don't even know if I could put a percentage on it, but almost every UC operation at some point touches into dope?
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, it really does. And if it's not even a direct tie, it's the people that prostitute, she's a drug addict.
And my experience, working undercover began in the property-related squad, and it took me all of about 1 week before I realized they're commingled. You can't separate illegal drugs from the property crimes, at least on a street level. You can later on a significant criminal syndicate that deals exclusively with large-scale drug usage, but by the time it trickles down to the street level, the two are hand in hand.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, and I did a long, long time ago, but I did an episode where I was buying stolen motorcycles, and that was probably one of the very, very few undercover operations that was lengthy that didn't touch into drugs. Now, I probably could have pushed it into drugs with one of these guys, but for the most part, it was a property crime. But that's definitely the exception.
It is the exception. And I had one we discussed when we talked about that Hells Angels, where it dealt exclusively with motorcycles and engine parts.
Right.
We never got into the drug end of it either back then. It was only the engines and the vehicles. But that seldom does it, not lead to a motorcycle usually leads to a bag of something illegal
Absolutely.
drugs.
Absolutely. So, and the other stuff, you talk about working undercover, and some of the things that we did when Jay and I both did, much of our time in that Special Investigations Bureau is just even strict surveillance, undercover surveillance, undercover operations where you're sitting on a street and you're watching somebody's house. Just anything, undercover work doesn't have to be necessarily doing a hand-to-hand drug buy in a parking lot. It can just be where you're wearing plain clothes, driving a plain car, trying to pursue some investigation.
Exactly. And often some of the most awkward situations I ever had were times when I was that plainclothes officer watching a house down the street from your house, but I happened to be parked in front of your house where, it leads to an awkward conversation and several lies of me explaining my presence in front of your house.
Right. Because sometimes, the neighbor comes out and says, hey, what are you doing here? Well, the problem is we don't know who neighbor knows who. So it's not like you can tell the neighbor, well, I'm watching your thug neighbor down the street. So you got to come up with some BS excuse or reason or whatever else. And what's even harder, and I always felt kind of bad for it, was if a cop contacted you from another agency.
Oh, I always felt bad because you would tell the cop who you were, and you would acknowledge the fact that, Kevin just came out of his house and was busting my balls for being parked in front of his house. So I'm sorry, but you can't tell him why I'm here. Would you please make up a reason, to explain my presence?
Right.
Tell him I'm, if it was a drug case, often I would say, tell him I'm a PI looking at on a domestic case involving a cheating spouse.
Cheating spouse, yep.
Yeah, I would come up with some BS that I would help the cop tell his lie to whoever he was going to have to respond to.
Yeah.
And they always did it. They respected the job I had to do.
Yeah, they're usually good. So let's get into the traditional undercover work. So traditional undercover work, I'll just lay out an example. So you have a detective. You got Detective Jay here. He's a narc detective, and he's supposed to deal with a narcotics problem, drug sales in a certain area, certain parking lot, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what we would do is we would basically, if Jay thought he could essentially cold call, walk into the situation, you could do that. And oftentimes what would happen is we'd do what we've talked about in so many episodes. You'd find someone who got arrested for dope, and you'd roll them, and you'd make them intro you into their little den of thieves circle of drug abuser, drug user, drug sellers. So Jay would say, hey, guy that I just rolled, I want you to intro me into whoever you buy your dope from. An intro is kind of like that gold ticket. Like you can't walk up to a drug dealer in almost any situation and go, hey, I want you to sell me some meth. I'm not going to sell you the meth.
It's the Willy Wonka ticket to the factory.
There you go.
You know, so you get your foot in the door, and all you have to do is have whoever's giving you the ticket vouch for you.
Somebody's got to vouch for you. It's almost like when we were talking about, Jay and I being retired and the body in the barrel story, and we were saying, somebody's got to vouch for you.
And thank goodness there are still people out there that remember either one of us that can vouch for us. So that worked out pretty good.
So we go back to Detective Jay, and he gets this drug person that's working off their charges, and they say, yep, this is my buddy Jay. He wants to buy some dope from you, and I'm vouching for him, essentially. That's not what they would say, but they would say, here it is. Now, if you're a drug dealer, a drug seller, you're always looking to expand business. So you're not going to turn business away unless you think it has anything to do with the cops. So they're going to make that quick assessment. I wonder if Jay's the cops. I don't know. Jay's going to have to kind of work his magic as well. Oftentimes they're going to do what with you? They're going to confront you.
Oh,
are you the cops?
Almost every time they confront you, they will ask you if you're a policeman, and you lie to them and say no, and then they tell you, if you lie to me and tell me that you're not a cop, that that's entrapment, right? And then often I would explain to them they're asking me all wrong, and then I'd make up some oath and make them raise their right hand, and they'd administer the oath to me that do you solemnly swear that you're not a cop? Blah, blah. I'd have a little fun with them, and they'd have a good chuckle about it, and I'd inform them that they have to do this from now on to everybody, because I would tell them, my brother, your uncle was a cop, and he told me a secret. So then they would pass that BS oath, through their people, but it's total horseshit. It was.
The next thing you know, it becomes law, right?
And it becomes an urban legend.
Urban legend law.
Yeah, exactly. So
Jay gets vouched for. He does his thing. He gets challenged, and then there's that actual hand-to-hand drug sale. So Jay buys buys his 20 rock of crack, or he buys his bit of meth.
And usually, well, without exception, you would try to cut that informant out almost immediately, because if you have somebody with you who's vouching for you, and you're buying some drugs from whoever they're passing the baton, passing you off to, you're never going to file the case where the informant was present. He's a material witness. He or she are a material witness to the case. And you don't want to, you've made assurances to them that you're going to protect their identity as best you can. So then you kind of just submit that for analysis to confirm it is drugs, and then you try to establish a relationship with whoever you just bought that, so you can come back and buy independent of having whoever brought you to the drug dealer, and then you just work your way up incrementally as high as you can in his food chain until he has to pass you off to somebody else. And in the perfect world, that person is going to pass you off to somebody else because they want to continue to make money off of your money. And at some point, whoever they're dealing with is not comfortable dealing, in a kilo of coke, because
it's usually quantity driven.
It's usually quantity driven, exactly.
Yeah,
because, when they start asking for more drugs, people get a little concerned of who you're dealing with, and bring that person to me next time, which worked out great, because then I would cut them out of the way, and they'd always try to hang there because they get a little piece of it in this form of drugs or money. But you want to get them out of the way, because you may have told them a different lie that you're going to be telling the new person as you work your way up in their organization.
Yeah. So it's not something that's a real quick investigation, doing this undercover work.
They're always lengthy, and you may have people think, like in the television version of working undercover, that you're only working one spoke on a wheel. There may be 50 spokes on that wheel, that you're on Monday you may be dealing with this person, and in the afternoon you're dealing with another person, or maybe nobody, and then you may be dealing with the other spokes on the wheel throughout the weeks, and all in different drugs, different areas of the town, different objectives, where you're trying to take that individual to. Some of them you may not even have an informant. It may be somebody that you had just established a relationship in a club, a bar, the street, you got lucky, asking somebody for drugs, that you knew was a drug dealer, and then you were able to work your way up independent of any informant.
Sure. That it takes, not everybody can do undercover. So you would have guys that would come into a specific work group, and there were just some guys that were just weak at it. They just weren't real good. You got to be real good at thinking on your feet. You got to be real good at staying calm. Especially when you get into some of these, we have, and I probably get into it, but you have some detectives that were basically threatened with their life unless they did X, or they, said Y, or they proved this or whatever. And you can't just lose it, or you're going to get yourself hurt.
Exactly. And Well, you and I worked around a lot of plainclothes cops and undercover cops, and I never faulted somebody for not being able to work UC because often it sounded like people were morally different or had a different moral compasses. They had a hard time lying. And my wife always, that we've been married 42 years, she's always questioned. She goes, well, you're a pretty good liar. What else are you lying about? Because you have to be able to think fast. You have to be able to respond differently. You have to be able to explain why somebody called you Jay when they knew you as Jason. So often my undercover persona was very close to my real name, not identical, but then if somebody ran into me that I knew in a different capacity, we played baseball together or softball, or we, drank, we were neighbors, and they inadvertently didn't realize I was at work when they were talking to me, at least that Jay could be explained to, Jason, Jay, it's all the same,
right.
So don't worry about it. So,
right.
But I enjoyed undercover work.
Yeah, it definitely was very challenging. All right, so back to my kind of trying to nutshell this. So, Jay says he wants to meet this guy. He gets the intro in from the person that's working their charges off. And as Jay alluded to, that first initial meeting, those are almost always just a wash. They go nowhere because we don't want to charge anything that's going to go to court. We're going to have to introduce the person that introed Jay in, because we got to distance them.
Exactly.
So Jay basically does his hand-to-hand. He buys his dope. He gives that guy the money. That's a walk. That's done. Never gets charged. It's essentially to get our foot in the door. We part ways. Jay would meet back with like cover guys and the supervisor later on in a parking lot or in, the office or whatever. Hey, this is how it went. How'd you guys feel? Blah, blah, blah. And then it's done. And then Jay would move on to either do something later on. He does paperwork. He may go help another narc with a buy. So when you start talking about the typical average undercover type of operations, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
It is.
It really is. And
yes.
So as Jay explained, you're always going to want to work up bigger. Now, we understand that part of the reason that we like undercover work is because we always get much better and stronger charging if we make undercover deals with somebody versus third party seeing something. Well, I saw A and B do this versus, well, I am A, I'm the undercover guy, and he sold me these drugs.
A hand-to-hand purchase of illegal substances is always better than finding it even during a search warrant in your bedroom or even in your pant pocket with your ID in it.
Right.
We all heard that those aren't my pants.
Right.
So it's always better where you can push a recording and I can hear
always
somebody's voice saying, okay, I got an ounce of coke, here you go. Give me the money. It's 15, whatever the number is.
And in a lot of these situations on these UC cases, what we do is we record them. Audio, sometimes video, sometimes both. So it's just so much better evidence. The other thing that we try to do is let's go back to Jay's initial meeting. So he buys this dope with his intro. That's a washed incident. Hey, we submit this drugs for analysis. Yep, that was coke. Well, the next purchase is just Jay and the dealer. And then what we want to do is typically you want to make 3 of those. 3 purchases or 3 sales constitute trafficking. So he's a drug trafficker. He's selling dope. If you just make 1 purchase off a dope guy, typically prosecutors are never going to go on that guy being a dealer. It's going to be more of a possession charge.
It's more of an isolated incident. It's not a pattern of behavior for a money-making venture.
Right. So from the management perspective, here's what I see. So Jay, I got this guy. Sounds good, Jay. Let's go. Let's get into him. Okay, I'm into him. I made that initial purchase. Everybody knows that, basically industry standard is 3 purchases before you charge. Well, what Jay wants to do is get up to the next level. So he wants to increase that quantity to push that guy into saying, you know what, I can't move that much weight, but my guy can. So that's when Jay gets to elevate to the next step. Well, part of the issue is Jay has this person, he makes his 3 buys. Anything over 3 buys essentially is wasted time and effort. So if we go to a prosecutor and we say, we've got 12 purchases of drugs off of this guy, they're still going to probably charge him with 1 trafficking charge.
And I've had heroin dealers that I had to buy from 10 times because they didn't want to pass me off to whoever was of the food chain.
Exactly what I was alluding to.
Exactly.
And that's the problem. So you've always got that funky dance where the UC is like, well, I can't get to the next level, but I can't drop this person off either. Well, but we also don't want to arrest them prematurely because we're still trying to jump up to that next level. So that whole UC game, well, the UC game in itself, there's so many different aspects to it. But, this is one of the ones from the prosecutorial and from the management perspective, is it's kind of a 3 and out. You want to do 3, you want to go to somebody else. You want to do 3, you want to move up to the next level. We don't want to just stagnate on the same guy and buy, rocks of crack off him 25 times because it's just not going to go anywhere.
Although the heroin guy was pretty fun to buy from 10 times. Because we went to trial on that case, and so his attorney tried to make a big deal out of me lying to him every time I bought. So he's trying to pay me out to be a liar, and there were 10 cases I had on him. He goes, Your Honor, on the jury, this man lied to my client. How many times did you lie to my client? I was on the stand. And I said 9 times. And he was doing the math. He goes, well, you bought from my client 10 times. He goes, what'd you do on the 10th time? I said, I told him I was a cop and I was going to come back and arrest him. And he goes, why did you do that? I go, I was tired of buying from your client. Right. I was just over this. And I go, he goes, what did my client do? He goes, he patted my chest, patted me down laughing. And you could actually hear when we played the recording, you could hear him hitting the body bug with funny. This transmitting.
Right.
And so, that was a 5-minute jury decision to convict. So
right.
That was fun.
Well, you bring up court, and I think that's a great thing to bring up. Any case where there's undercover operations similar to what we just described, they never go to court. They always plea out because
99% of the time,
they're hammered. They're stuck.
Yeah.
Even if they get a really good high-dollar attorney, the attorney's going to look at the evidence and go, I got nothing to attack here. You're screwed.
Unless your attorney believes that lying narc is a great strategy of defense.
Yeah, if he's then he's not a great attorney if he believes that.
Exactly.
So that's one example of what an undercover person does. And again, it's, when you do these operations, depending, let's say that Jay did this in an open parking lot. Not such a big deal. You can probably get away with having maybe like 1 or 2 plainclothes guys in a car, just kind of keeping an eye out on him. Maybe monitoring, electronic devices if we're using those. We don't know. That can be pretty low key. When we start sending people into dangerous environments, especially anytime they enter into a structure, I would say, because to me as a manager, a house is a structure, an apartment's a structure. Anything that's going to slow down us being able to try to get to the undercover to help them or the undercover being able to just basically run away, that always complicates the issue. So if we're going to send Jay into an apartment, and again, typically this apartment that he'd be going into is not going to be in a great part of town. It's probably in a rougher part of town. Well, we would have to establish greater methodology for protecting him or trying to protect him. And when I'd get a new narc on my squad or a new detective, because my squad did so many things and they did do narcotics as well, I always made sure that they understood that, I can put together the best plan. And we called it a rescue operation is what we would call it. But it's not really a rescue operation because if Detective Jay is going in to buy dope, he goes in that apartment and something goes completely wrong, we can't rescue him. We can recover him. We can help him if he's able to fight things off, but we can't rescue that person. That's part of the reason that a UC's work can be so dangerous.
It's scary. It's for people that like adrenaline and
it's the best.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie, so I would rather be the guy working undercover than the guy in the parking lot. But you're absolutely right. The people inside, I always viewed it as basically I had to be a pretty good chess player, and you had to be thinking 2 and 3 moves ahead of what your opponent was doing and to try to anticipate what they're doing inside. But that being said, even when you do that, there are some occasions where the world just turns upside down. You and I both know a man that was inside working undercover on what seemed to be a very simple recovery mission to go recover a hydrogenator, a piece of equipment used to make drugs. And his rescue team on the outside was on the outside when he got in a shooting on the inside, and nobody on the outside even knew he was in a shooting, until he came out and he said, I just had to shoot a guy. Actually, he didn't even know he shot the guy because he was carrying a little Derringer that I passed off to him, and he thought it malfunctioned twice, but he'd actually shot the guy twice when he was trying to save his life. So it's incumbent on whoever's inside, to save their own life. And
yeah, that's it. It is their responsibility. And I hate to say it, but that is the true reality is you are not, no one's going to save you. If things go completely upside down in a moment, we can't just magically appear in that structure or in that parking lot.
Well, it takes the time that takes to get you from the curb or down the street to wherever I'm at in the bedroom or the house. You don't know where I'm at. I'm familiar with what's going on inside because I have eyes on.
Right.
But you guys have no idea where I am inside, or 50% of the time the body bugs don't work right. At least the equipment I had.
They're in and out.
Yeah, they are in and out. And technology will always fail when you need it the most.
So, again, going back to that average thing. So if we've stepped it up, and we're talking about a structure, almost all the time there's going to be some sort of a monitoring device that we will use, and that device is monitored, and we try to, as the cover officers / manager, sergeant, whatever, you're basically having to, in between the static, in between the garble, in between the lost signals, in between anything that you may or not be able to see, you're always having to ascertain, is the UC still okay? Do we need to do anything or not? And then there's always going to be a plan in place. So what we used to call it basically a soft contact or an oh shit contact. So a soft contact meant that, let's say that Detective J is doing his thing, and maybe this dealer guy is getting a little too aggressive, or he doesn't like something that's going on, or whatever is happening. Well, Jay is going to have the opportunity to give either a visual or an audible signal, or both, to say that he wants a contact, but he doesn't want the cavalry to come in. So what he's saying is he wants maybe a UC person to come walking up like they're lost, or they're a friend of his, or, whatever it is we have prearranged. Or it could even be, we have someone in a patrol car that rolls up in a patrol car to kind of spook this thing out, to settle things down again. So that would be like an example of a soft contact. Now, more of the distress is what we'd call it, the distress signal, the oh shit moments is, that's a signal, a visual, guy turns around and runs away. That means things have gone completely to crap and you need the cavalry. So that's when all the cover people would come running in immediately.
It's pretty chaotic when that happens. I mean, you'll usually have someone coming out a window, or, it's pretty obvious that I need whoever that undercover officer is. They need somebody in there right now, right. Because something they're seeing, they see a gun, they see other people that weren't supposed to be there are sneaking up on you. They see things. You sound like you did a better job of planning than some of the sergeants I worked with over the years. And having that individual that. I only had the oh shit moment,
Right.
You seem to have planned, which is a great planning to have that.
Well, I think we learned.
You do. You learn from a lot of those oh shit moments that we weren't quite there yet. So maybe there's somebody that we can have that oops moment, or maybe moment. So that's a good step in between there and that moment of crisis.
So if you haven't, you should get a good idea that there's actually quite a bit of work and planning and manpower that go into all of this stuff. And another aspect, one of the things that my guys used to drive me nutty on was we'd call it tripping. So these guys, a lot of times, let's say that Detective J goes to meet his drug dealer B, and they're in the parking lot, and the guy's like, you know what, I don't like it here. You're going to go meet me over here, and we're going to do the deal there. Well, we've set everything up for that location. So we hated tripping. I hated tripping. Now, from the undercover aspect, Detective J's going to be like, no problem, I got this. And sometimes we're going to do it, and sometimes we're not.
Those were always so uncomfortable because working undercover, working UC, they've planned for the Holiday Inn parking lot. And everything for the last 2 or 3 hours has been choreographed around what's going to happen in that parking lot. Nobody's going to leave that parking lot. Now, sometimes shit changes, and I remember a cocaine deal. I was buying a kilo of coke from some kids, the young adults that drove it over from California. So I showed them the money. The plan was they drove it over in a stretch limousine that I didn't know that they were dreaming of, and brought it over to me in style. So, but we had identified the car. I was going to meet the dealer in the car, and nobody was to leave the parking lot. I wasn't to leave the parking lot, but once I got in the back of the limo, he told his driver to leave. And so we tripped inadvertently. I had to leave, which was hilarious because nobody gave a shit about me, Kevin. Everybody watched the car with the money.
With the money.
Yeah, so I went off to, on a little walkabout in the stretch limo where the guy threatened me, pulled out my driver's license, checked my undercover name, and, talked about hurting my children, which he didn't know based on my, but I did have kids, so I took it personal, and then came back and ultimately did the deal. It worked out okay. But those choreographed events, and if you have a guy go mobile, and especially you have the UC guy agree to that, it's terrible. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but for the most part, it's kind of like you throw a Hail Mary then, and it's Omaha scramble, and it's
right
chaotic.
Right. Well, and again, from from the management perspective, you're always trying to weigh, do the ends justify the means? Is this worth doing? I mean, because again, we can always quantify this down to its base level. I used to say, well, if safety was the main priority of all cops, we wouldn't do shit.
You wouldn't be a cop.
We'd never go anywhere.
Exactly.
We'd be like the fire department. We'd show up to calls like 47 guys in mass, and we do what we need to do. We all run back to the station and hang out watching cable, right?
And then somebody would drop off cookies at the station for you because
everybody loved us because we wouldn't do anything. We'd never interfere. Yeah. So you always have to weigh out. That's the crux of it all. Is the safety issue, is the danger issue, not outweigh the end objective. And when you're the undercover, you're always going to err on the side of being the opposite of cautious. You're always going to be taking the gambles. You're always going to want to make the risk. Now, that doesn't mean that you're stupid. It just means that you have a different perspective. You want to work the case. That's your job. Your job is to buy dope and put people in jail. Your job is to buy dope and get to the next level and buy dope. That's your job. So that's what those guys do. So the perspective of the other side, whether it could even be your partner, a guy that you work with a lot, or the manager, they have to always be looking out for your best interest, basically. And we talked about this before. It's funny that Jay says something about, because again, when you start talking about the bigger cases where you're using flash money, where you're talking a lot of flash money and you're talking pounds and pounds of dope, that's a lot of product and it's a lot of money. It's a big risk.
I've flashed $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 worth of money on drug deals, and those are a little bit scarier than $1,000 deals.
And so, when you look at it in those perspectives, that just brings in a whole new myriad of problems, because yes, you are the steward of the city's money. If you lose the money, there's going to be problems, or you're going to get, scrutinized, and you're going to have issues to deal with. But the bottom line, and this is what always, I don't know, I guess it just got me, is sometimes these supervisors would plan these operations as almost the money was worth more than the UC. They put more emphasis on, okay, we're going to have a team that's specifically tied to the cash. If the cash goes anywhere, that's where it goes. But the UC, not so much.
I've had that feeling many times. So it just makes you feel a little insignificant as you're attending the raid briefing and you see 6 guys focused on a trunk that's not even going to have a man in it, and 2 guys are following you when you're going to the bad guy.
Right. Well, there's your example.
Yeah.
So, but it gives you a good idea, going back to the whole premise of the episode, what is real UC like? Well, this is what real UC is like. It's more of there's probably a lot more administrative problems and issues and complications than there is like a Donnie Brasco, where here's a guy doing this thing where he truly is probably in fear for his life a good majority of his time. But we'll get to that too. So the other things that UC can be involved in, let's talk about prostitution.
Okay.
I did an episode on prostitution, so I touched on a lot of, some of my experiences and the things of how prostitution works. But it's very similar. So you have a person that's in an undercover role that's basically trying to snag up a suspect in a crime. And again, you can argue whether victimless crime, blah, blah, blah. We can argue those things back and forth, but currently it is. And that's what part of your job as a UC was to try to curtail the prostitution issues in some of the parts of the city. So you could work undercover that way. And undercover in that way is you have to play this dance as to what you say and can't say in order to get this prostitute person to commit a crime. Solicitation.
We had a chief, I think he was there when you were hired, who was very churchy and very, I don't want to say churchy. It sounds like I'm saying churchy in a bad way, but he really was offended by prostitution. And he just was so, that would not occur in my town. It was his opinion. We can't have a prostitute in my town. We can't have a strip joint in my town. So at the time I was working narcotics, and vice crimes, or the prostitution crimes, any sexual crimes that are like that, not like a sexual assault or a sexual abuse involving a child, but the ones that are in violation of a law that is
consensual stuff.
Yeah,
really.
that happens to be, in today's environment illegal, and maybe tomorrow may not be illegal, much like marijuana in the state of Arizona, was illegal, and now it's recreational,
Right.
So, but at the time he took offense to it. So we were tasked out quite frequently to go to the adult bookstores, or we had really a tough area of town called Apache Boulevard, which is very nice now. We're far nicer than it ever was, where we just had streetwalkers, girls working the streets. And so there were times that we'd have to go see if they offered up sex in exchange for money. And
Right.
so there would always be kind of a window curb, dance with the language, because I can't name the act. They would have to name the act and agree to the price. And so there was a bit of a dance, dancing around what could and couldn't be said. And they knew they're very streetwise.
Oh, yeah.
Extremely streetwise. So we would have to do those investigations, as well as back in the day we had these magazines that would cater to the sex trade. And so they would have in-call escorts where they didn't feel comfortable walking the streets looking for a customer. However, if you called them, or you had a house or an apartment, or were visiting on at a motel, they would agree to come out to your wherever you were at, house, motel, apartment, and agree again after you'd have another dance of words inside your privacy of your apartment or wherever that may be, to get to the point of agreeing to a particular act of sex in exchange for money.
Right. Okay, so here's from the aspect of the supervisor. Well, prostitution's not real high on my list. I mean, it never was.
Exactly.
It's a crime. I get it. It's a crime. But even as a crime, it's only a misdemeanor, for one thing. So I don't like jeopardizing the safety of my undercover guys. I'm not going to let them go too crazy on that. If things don't come together, then we ditch out and we're done.
Yeah.
So it is a dance, and you get guys, again, like Jay and some of these guys that did a ton of undercover. They know how to work it. They know the things to say. They know how to put people at ease. That's the biggest thing, I think, is undercover, is putting people at ease.
It is.
Getting them to trust
it
you.
doesn't matter what you're investigating. Whoever you're talking to about whatever your objective, whatever objective you're trying to accomplish, you need to make them feel comfy and
Right.
that you're the right person to engage in that conversation, to get you to actually engage in that business that you're trying to get to.
Right. Again, some people can do it and some people can't. But so that is another aspect of working undercover. So another, we already touched on the issue of, property crimes and things like that, working undercover. That factors in as well. But like Jay just said, it's kind of all the same. You're basically just trying to get people to implicate and or participate in criminal activity. We don't want to entrap them.
No, you don't want to plant the idea of being a prostitute or selling drugs with anybody that wasn't already engaged in that course of behavior.
Yeah, inclined in that.
Yeah, entrapment, the simple version is, if I saw a homeless person trying to collect change, from me at a stoplight, and then I try to, hey, come with me and let's rob a bank, or jump in the car with me and let's have sex for a certain amount of money, when they were just asking me for a quarter or a cup of coffee or something, whatever I'm gracious enough to pass out the window. That's entrapment.
Right.
I don't want to plant that seed with anybody that isn't predisposed to have that notion and pursue that line of illegal activity.
Yeah. And again, does it happen? Well, sure it does. I can tell you from my experience, we worked very hard to not ever give that implication that was what was going on, because it's terrible. It's a terrible precedent. It's a terrible thing to put in a prosecutor or a defense attorney's mind.
Well, very, very difficult. And again, those streetwalkers were kind of hard. We know a guy. They're often these prostitutes would say, "Well, show me your junk. Reveal yourself to me." And
Right.
I can't do that. I'm not going to whip out my penis and show it to them when they ask me to. I think by the letter of the law and by what the county attorney or the city attorney, they probably would have been okay with that, but departmentally and administratively, and more importantly, my home life would have been the same had my wife failed every night. I was out unzipping my trousers, showing somebody my wiener to get a misdemeanor arrest. To me, even if it's a felony arrest, it wouldn't go over very well. So
No. And again, that it just shows you again that the undercover, there's just so many different aspects to it. And again, with undercover work, I think more so than, maybe even any type of work in the PD, you really had to weigh the risk versus the reward.
And what my experience is, you have to have a person, whether it's a man or a woman, that has got some smarts about them, who are very quick thinkers.
Got to be able to think on your
You have
feet.
to be able to think on your feet, because it's so easy to get in over your head, before you know it. And if you're not anticipating, that somebody's going to ask you to, do a line of coke or to, smoke some, hit the pipe or bong out, it's just so hard to get out of those things sometimes. So you have to be smart.
Yeah, and the penalty for failure usually wasn't terrible. So let's just say that you had a new person and you're trying to expose them into the life of undercover work, and they would go and try to buy dope. Well, let's say that they sucked at it. Well, usually the penalty wasn't that they wouldn't get killed. The penalty was they didn't get the deal.
Right. I mean, it's difficult when we train a new narc to get the feeling of being a cop off. When you're wearing a T-shirt and shorts or a pair of Levi's, it's so hard since you've been in patrol and wearing a uniform for however many years before all of a sudden you find yourself in an undercover capacity, or you have the ability to work undercover, to get what you feel like the cop stamp off your forehead. So it takes quite a while before you even get comfortable having those conversations with people, like asking them for drugs.
Right.
When you have no life experience asking people for drugs, and you've been putting people in jail for any drugs you found up until that point, and now you're trying to have a beer and have a guy do you a solid or
It's a totally different dynamic.
It's a completely different dynamic.
Because again, from the PD perspective, you can't just, and there are exceptions. There is an exception. We'll chat about that. But you don't just go straight into undercover work. So, you talk to a lot of young people that want to go into police work, and you're like, oh, well, what do you want to do? Oh, I'm going to be a homicide detective. I'm going to be a SWAT cop. I'm going to do canine. Well, nobody does those things at first. You have to be a cop for typically about 2 years.
Yeah.
And then you start to progress into these specialty assignments. Well, undercover is the same way, with the exception of and I don't think they do this so much anymore either, but years ago, and in some times what we did is we would do undercover work in the schools.
I'm glad you're talking about that, because I happen
because
to
you were involved with it.
I was involved in that.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's a very sticky wicket. You have to be really careful there. And the trouble is, when you pull somebody out of the academy on graduation day and you put them in a position where you don't know what kind of work product that person will, they may have excelled in the police academy and they may suck in what you're asking them to do. Yeah. And they may be totally the wrong person for that job. I mean, the negatives are huge. I mean, there's real big consequences of failure there.
There are. And we could spend a lot of time on that. I'm just trying to throw out, that is another undercover type of work. And it's probably the only undercover work where you would go straight from academy into that line of work.
And more often than not, it's unsuccessful.
Yes. Often, like we've discussed on some of these, ends justify the means. They usually aren't that big of a deal.
But I will say this, even the unsuccessful ones that we've run have been successful on the school level, because you may have one narc that might have been in there for a month before you bounced him out because you were terrified that they were doing something inappropriate there. But the rumor gets out, and then everybody's an narc. And so for the next 3 or 4 years,
decade.
Exactly.
I mean, forever.
People, it's like everybody's 21 Jump Street, or somebody thinks that the new kid on the block, they must be, the narc that's come in.
Yeah.
So
it's just like, it's the only reason that people drive decently on the freeway.
Right.
There's probably 100,000 cars on the road to every cop that can stop them, but just that minuscule little view of someone got pulled over, or I saw a cop, that's what keeps people in check.
And a funny side note here on any school project I ever ran, the people that gave us the most heartache in these school things were always the school nurses, because we could fabricate school records and dress them up, bullshit records, to make it look like this kid was flunking out of 8th grade. But we had a hard time with like inoculation records, showing that you had the proper tetanus shots.
Oh, how funny.
To a point where one guy I put in the school, he had just had a tetanus shot, but we didn't have the records for it of it. So we had to make sure it was okay to give him another tetanus shot. And he was John. He was he was really pissed off. I made him go get another tetanus shot because I was so tired of the nurse busting my balls, all because I was his uncle, trying to put my nephew into this school.
Right.
And again, once we did get him in school, he was too good a student for my taste. I wanted him to fail a few. He was a bit of an overachiever. And so.
But again, you kind of put some unrealistic expectations on these guys that are fresh out of the academy. Because like you're saying, just because someone excels in the academy, oftentimes that doesn't make them a great cop.
And they were wired to excel in the academy, so I should have realized that they would be wired to be the valedictorian of the school, where I wanted them on the curb across the street smoking a cigarette with, the Kirby's.
You want them trying to strive to be the best in their class, to be the worst in their class.
Exactly.
In a week.
Yeah. So that was difficult with that particular guy.
Weird
Although
dynamic.
he was really successful. He did a great job, but I had to kind of, tamp down his desire and the way he was wired to be the best.
Yeah. You had to unsucceed. I can't even think of the term I'm thinking of.
I don't know.
Anyway, so that is another aspect. So what's another aspect of undercover work? The one that I was thinking of, sometimes undercover work can be kind of a one and done, in and out. We had a case where we had a SWAT rifle was stolen out of a vehicle, and it was a big deal, and everybody, because again, it's a pretty specialized weapon, and it went gone for a while. And some months later, one of my guys had a CI that approached him and said, "Hey, I know where that assault rifle is." So, of course, everything gets scrambled. And then there's this dance of, okay, how are we going to get this thing back? Because one, we don't know where it's at. We have that issue, but we also have the issue of, are we going to prosecute or are we not going to prosecute? Because a lot of times when some of these CIs or CSs, confidential sources, come to you, they want to promise that nobody's going to jail. And that can be really difficult to pull off. So you have an undercover component, and in this case, we had the rifle. We wanted to get it back. We wanted to get it back at almost any cost. And there was a huge debate that I had to have with some of the people above me to say, listen, this person's not it. Okay, so here's the deal. We get the information. We know where the rifle is. We promise that source that we won't prosecute, but then we do prosecute. We've completely grenaded our relationship with that confidential source or informant.
You've put that informant in jeopardy.
Absolutely.
His life's at risk.
His life is at risk. So it's a bad thing to do. So you've really got to commit to what you are and are not going to do. So in this case, anyway, we had an undercover that was going to go buy our rifle back from this person, but we could not prosecute. We couldn't do a thing. So, man, I'll tell you about a dance. That thing was really a dance of getting around, administrators that wanted to basically, they wanted us kicking doors and blowing shit. They sure did. They really wanted it to where I have my poor detective that's got the CS going, boss, if we go crazy on this thing, you're going to burn this guy, and he's fear for his life, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so that's a really good example of a very 0 to 100 miles an hour, 100 different aspects involved. UC goes in, we buy this rifle, we back out, we make sure that nobody goes to jail. And to this day, nobody went to jail. One hit, I don't want to say one hit wonder, but stuff can just launch up and spool up, and then it goes back down, and then it's done. And you have to accept that there are going to be those cases where you have nobody goes to jail. You have no end game. It's basically you've got what you got.
And then sometimes when you see there's no end around, there's no way that you can get to C without going through B, and to go through B, you're going to burn your informant, but to get to C is so important. Sometimes I would have to pull an informant aside and say, listen, I will sweeten the pot for you. Your case will be done. If he was a working informant for money, because there were times that you have paid informants who just want to come in and do this for money, I would just say, I have to get here, and the only way I can get there, I'm going to put you at risk. Are you willing to take the risk? And then at that point, there's a renegotiation, or at least a conversation that I would never surprise somebody or throw them a curve without having that respect for the relationship that we had at that point.
Right. And I think we would. And some of the things that I think the administrators forget about, because we've had administrators that are like, well, screw that guy. Who cares? Screw that woman. They committed a crime. So what if things don't go the way they want to get and they get endangered? Well, they forget the problem is that that confidential source or informant, they also have the ability to put our undercovers at a huge risk.
Well, they do it, and then sometimes you have to have a conversation with whoever the administrators you're having that problem with, and say, the relationship that your undercover guy and that informant has probably already lessened the risk that other undercover guys would have experienced had it not been for the person that brought him in the front door holding his hand.
Yep.
So they do provide a value. It's like canine. We've had canine discussions where you send a dog into a building not because you want the dog to get killed, rooting out the fleeing felon or the bad guy. It's if anybody was going to lose their life today, a dog is unfortunately, less of a loss than a human being. So, right. Those are awkward conversations to have with administrators.
For sure. And again, and this is where, a lot of times it's really difficult. You get a guy or Jay and I who have, well over a couple of decades, if not more, of experience in this undercover stuff. You have administrators that are trying to essentially set the rules, set the guidelines, and make decisions based with no experience in that type of thing.
Most of the time, they have no experience in what they're trying to tell you to do.
It'd be like me trying to walk into a bank and start to dictate what your financial practices are going to be. I don't know anything about money other than spending it and saving it. Right. So that can factor in. So coming, full circle back to the undercover thing. So you can see that there's a number of different ways that undercover work is involved with law enforcement and different crimes and in different situations and long investigations, short investigations, goes on and on. But the vast majority is, like I said, more of the quick hit, couple hours here, couple hours there, different investigations. Now, if you're a busy undercover, you can do half of your shift is undercover work, but you still have paperwork that's involved. You have court. You have to help other people do their jobs. There's other things that are going on. Do you have any other like the normal undercover type of information before we go into the other stuff?
Well, is the other stuff going to be the family? How it affects your family?
Well, I think we can talk about that as well, because I want to talk about like the deep immersion, like the Donnie Brasco-y type of thing that doesn't happen.
Okay, it's there. Your listeners have to understand that there is a ripple effect on your family, whether it's Donnie Brasco, total immersion, or it's just you spend 4 hours of an 8-hour shift working undercover. There is an effect on your life. And I fortunately made it all the way through those years with the same wife I started. My children, I made it through those years fine. But it takes a special woman to be at home waiting for their undercover husband to come home from the bar, smelling like a strip joint in a bar, to accept the fact that this man has a weird job, and so it's just a job, but it does have an effect, at home. My wife, who's a very patient soul, was always very supportive, and she always didn't want to know everything I did. We had a pretty open dialogue where I would share stuff with her, including all of the escorts that I would do. I didn't do any escorts, let me fix that. I didn't do those escorts.
The escort investigations you were involved with?
Yeah, because often these escort investigations are even videotaped, and so I would share that with her too. Say, "Well, baby, you can watch the tape." I kept my clothes on, or I only had to get down to my boxers or my tidy whities, whatever I was wearing. But it's still it's weird. It's weird to go to a school function when your children are having a concert or something, and your wife is explaining fake track marks on your arm if you happen to be working a heroin organization, or you run into somebody that is a parent of my wife was she became an educator, and during her student teaching years, it turns out that one of her kindergarten kids that she had in her class, their parent was a big cocaine target that I was focused on. Now, he got away with it. I never got to him, but he certainly knew that by the time that he met me, that how close he came to prison, that I was a narc and he was a bad boy.
Well, it's funny you bring up the whole kid, parent, teacher, blah, 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 because you think about, now again, if you're working undercover or you're working in any of these assignments that Jay and I have worked, you're dirty. So you're not super clean cut. You don't wear nice clothes. You don't look so good. Sometimes, depending if you're really doing an undercover role, sometimes you let yourself get a little stinky.
You really do. It's kind of like living in this world of COVID right now. I find I don't give a shit about my hair because I'm wearing a mask, and I just don't venture out so much. So it's kind of like undercover too. You don't care if you've just mowed the yard and you're going to work looking like that. And then you kind of forget that even if it's your off day, you probably ought to go take a shower and clean up after mowing the yard if you're going to go to the neighbor's barbecue or a school function.
But exactly, but sometimes you just don't.
You don't.
Because a lot of times, let's say, because the majority of the shifts that Jay and I would work doing this kind of stuff was PMs. So during the day, you'd probably go to that school function knowing that you were going to go straight to work right afterward. So a lot of times you got your poor wife that's, and she can't even really explain it completely as to why her husband looks like a scumbag in some circles. Because you'd be like, babe, you can't tell him. You can't tell him what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So you put him in this really awkward spot. You get a lot of crazy looks. Sometimes, and I literally had it happen a couple of times where you go to pick up your little one and an administrator would come up and confirm that you're dad.
Exactly.
Because you look like a scumbag that's here to steal this kid,
Or in my case, there were times where we were very poor early on in life. And you're driving a car that's worth as much as your house that you're living in. And people are like, oh, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah, that's a good
or
one too.
Why do you have a different car
all the time?
All the time, because you wear Levi's, you hold irregular hours, and your close neighbors know what you do. But the people 3 and 4 doors down, they may not know what you're doing, and you may not want them to know what you're doing because they may be in a funny business too.
Yeah. Well, even still, if you think about it, you have these neighbors that they know what you're doing, but they also watch TV and movies, and they watch Dirty Cop, they watch S.H.I.E.L.D. and all this stuff. And then they see you driving these different cars all the time. You're coming and going at all crazy hours of the night. Sometimes you'll tell them a little story of something. That people look at you a little sideways. Like, are you sure? Is this guy in the complete up and up, or is some of this stuff a little shady?
Right.
And in our case, it wasn't, but in some cases,
shady, but
it can be.
To hear the words, much like, I've had neighbors who have listened to some of these segments that we do together and like, are you kidding? Really that happened to you? Somebody called you about a body in a barrel.
Yeah.
Last weekend, and that happens.
Yeah.
So, it's just a real weird world that we've operated in over the years.
Well, it's a weird world that we operate, but it's a weird world that we drag our families into as well.
We are.
That have to deal with it.
And to some degree, and I've shared this with my wife and family, I carry a bit of guilt with me about being less attentive to my family during those years when I worked narcotics, and my lovely wife will say, "Well, baby, you're too busy trying to feed the family," and silently I know, maybe I don't think so, because I remember every deal I ever did between the ages of 4 and 8 of my children, maybe, but I have a hard time remembering concerts that I went to for them, and so it's just a weird. You have a bit of I guess survivor guilt if I was or maybe misplaced importance guilt or
But we can't go back. It is what it is.
We can't, and they still love and like me, so.
Well, and I think it brings up, we talked about the stressors, but when you're an undercover cop, again, you got one thing, you have to think that you're the best. You have to have that mindset. You're the best you see out there.
Exactly.
You become completely absorbed in your cases, even when they're small cases, because sometimes the smaller cases, if it's someone that's a real piece of work, a real asshole, you get so absorbed in that case, you get overabsorbed.
Well, not only that, some of my lesser level cases that I assume were just your run-of-the-mill, ASU pot dealer cases, I have discovered that I was in more jeopardy with that case than any of my higher level ones.
Which
I got
is a great point.
Pissed off the second time I went back to narcotics. I think I was buying 10 pounds of weed from somebody, and he had a bigger gun than I did, and I was so offended that here was some frat boy that would show up for a drug deal, a marijuana. Yeah, it's a marijuana deal,
You don't bring guns to marijuana
well,
deals.
in my
that's only the coke biz.
In my earlier days,
yeah.
It seemed like there was a gentleman's agreement back then, but over time the world became more violent and became more of a business than it was more of a more of a help a brother out, type thing.
Well, less business and it became more cutthroat.
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
And that's another great point. So they've actually done statistics when they talk about undercover officers and, the dangers they face and this and that. And I believe that don't quote me on numbers, but I believe that it was just as dangerous and you had as much chance of getting killed over like a $20 rock than you did over a 20-pound deal of marijuana.
Oh, I believe that completely.
Crack cocaine. I mean, some of these smaller issues, because it all came down to who was dealing the drugs. It wasn't so much the drug, it was who was dealing it, or the quantity, I'm sorry. It was more of the drug and who was dealing
Right,
it.
and that $20 to whoever you're buying from might mean a hell of a lot more than that $2,000,
Right.
for the other one. It's so, and plus if they don't deal with you on the street, the reputation gets out that other people can steal the rock from them.
Oh, yeah.
So I agree with that completely.
Yeah, so just another danger. So we've kind of exhausted that's basically the crux of UC work. It's not constant. 99% of the time, it's not a constant thing. It comes and goes. It ebbs and flows. There's different aspects as you want to do it. But in those cases, very rare that they are, but they do occur, the Donnie Brasco case. So take into account all of the other issues that we've already discussed, with the issues with the danger and the logistics that have to go into trying to protect those people and some of these other things, and now immerse yourself into it 100%. Well, not 100%, but pretty darn all your waking hours. So you take a Donnie Brasco, or you take some of these cases that Jay and I are familiar with, where essentially all their waking hours, they are working undercover. The one thing, probably the biggest takeaway from all of this, is none of these men and women come out of that unscathed.
They're all damaged.
They're all damaged.
Their careers, long-term career is damaged. Their relationship with their wives and children are damaged. Their relationships with their parents, their admin. I've seen some guys come out of these big, deep undercover cases that you're talking about, where the relationship between their administration and them become adversarial, where they end up suing one another, and it's not worth it. It's just and the benefit, if you were to dissect those and break down case by case by case, and the information learned that the case is prosecuted, and look at the damage that it did, they would never do them again.
Right.
And usually what happens is enough time goes by and people forgot how much damage was done in the last case. And before you know it, that pendulum's swung far enough, like, damn it, let's do it again. This is the first time this has ever been done. People forget that, it is just, it's a cycle, and then it starts over again.
Yeah. And I think, you hear about all the complexities that go into an undercover operation. Very it's controlled as much as we can get. But look at all the ways that things can go sideways, even if it's just that 10-minute parking lot deal, right? Now expand that and compound it by 1,000 times, where you have this undercover officer that's going to be put in so many situations where there's opportunity for things to go wrong, for them to misinterpret something, for them to do something that they shouldn't have done, for them to commit a crime. And then you end up left with you're giving the defense so much material when these things are finished to pick apart any good that was brought about by the investigation. Again, just trailers on what Jay was saying. So many times the investigation just falls apart. It's all for naught.
And even if they don't acknowledge that it's fallen apart, in the privacy of their own house administration, they have those conversations and they go, damn it, we can't ever let anybody know how bad this got,
Right.
So they'll never ever share it. So before you know it, they're not prosecuting 100 cases, they're prosecuting 30 cases, because 70 of them are questionable because something has come out that their star undercover officer has been deep in a bag of coke or meth, or doing stuff that they shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah. Well, and then once one happens, then every single defense attorney is going to grab onto whatever started that, and it's just a bad ball that keeps gaining speed.
It's the public and the shared criminal defense strategy that they then share amongst one another, and before you know it, every defense attorney is using the same strategy of, I was invited to the White House by our president, as their defense. So it's just it's awkward.
Yeah. So I don't know. And again, I guess we could go into a lot more detail about this deep immersion. And again, we know people firsthand, and you could give examples of pitfalls and problems. But I think we kind of touched on the whole crux of that, doing that kind of an operation. I don't know. And I don't know I suppose if the right type of investigation, the right type of UC, I suppose if the stars really aligned, I would maybe say, okay, I think it's okay in a particular situation, but I don't even know then.
And I don't even know what that would be, because I've thought of that. I mean, right now child sex trafficking. So how would you put an undercover officer into an organization like that without asking that person to put the blinders on to like a sexual abuse or a child trafficking situation? And besides, human trafficking and child trafficking, I don't know a crime out there that would be significant enough to risk an officer, a detective, man or woman, it doesn't matter. We didn't even talk about the jeopardies that female undercover officers have. Because, I had several female partners over the years, and it working by themselves, it sometimes was more awkward. Nobody asked me for sex when I was by myself, whereas, all my undercover female officers they're always solicited.
Every single one.
Everybody wants to hold back. They want to barter for their drugs in a sexual favor. And so it's just bad. So I don't know if I would ever, if I was a manager I don't know who I would use.
Yeah.
Or what type of crime I'd consider worth the risk.
Yeah. That's the child sex crime stuff is a great example, because the other part of the problem that you run into when you're running, any kind of an undercover operation that's not a single, one hit, in and out in a night, is you're technically allowing a crime to continue. So you're letting that dealer continue to sell drugs. You're letting that person that's stealing property continue to steal property. So there's always going to be the argument from some aspects or some sides of the coin of, you're the cops. You're not supposed to let crime continue. You find out about a crime, you stop the crime. And, it makes sense on its face, but if you work the undercover world, if you work the bigger, deeper, longer, more complex type of investigations, we know that in many cases it's better to let things continue with the end. And, again, it's that, what is it worth to hit the end game that you're trying to accomplish? And a lot of this stuff, man, it's just not there. It's just not there. The child sex crime stuff. So yeah, that's a great example. So you're going to put this cop in there. I would think that almost anything that they would see, any normal, reasonable person would say, you cannot let that continue. You got to stop that.
I saw a lady one time, I was buying some heroin, and I saw a kid get hit in the head with a rock. And I was using a woman as an intermediary, and it was her kid that got hit in the head with a rock. He told his mom, "Mommy, Junior just hit me in the head with a rock." And she asked the boy who threw the rock, "Did you hit him in the head?" He goes, "Yeah." And she slapped the shit out of her own kid in front of me for him being a snitch. And I was in a position working this case. I could not effectively yank her out of her shoes and take her to jail for her slapping her 7-year-old for being an informant, for getting hit. And so I would not be the right guy to put in a sexual, in that sex trafficking role, because I couldn't let one thing go, for a nanosecond.
So think about it. But you're comfortable with letting some other things go.
I wasn't comfortable letting that get.
No, not that. But you're comfortable with the drug dealer that keeps selling drugs. You're comfortable with, what else would you be comfortable with? If you're an undercover and you're going to let crimes continue, would you let, what if it was a guy beating on another guy?
Probably comfortable.
Yeah. You see what I'm saying? It's a weird line, right?
Very weird.
It's a weird line, because I think that you could say, you could kind of go to the absolutes. The absolutes would be anything with kids. Oh, we can't tolerate. There's no way. The other side of the coin would be people that, in essence, they asked for it or they deserved it. And
they could beat on one another until somebody was getting ready to get killed. I would have to intervene to preserve a life.
Yeah.
But then again, I wouldn't intervene by pulling out a badge I didn't have with me. I would jump. We would both jump on the guy and stop him from killing where he was. And then they would sort it out down the line. He would eventually find out I was a narc or undercover guy, but he would never know right then.
Right. So, let's follow that mindset into this thing with these guys that are deep undercover. And probably, in all the ones that I know of, those guys had to struggle with that stuff probably by the hour.
Well, I think they struggled initially with that by the hour, but I think the struggle becomes less and less for them when they're immersed in that environment longer and longer.
Well, that's true.
Where their new undercover world is just painted with a different paintbrush that's a little dirtier than the one they used to live in. So that's acceptable behavior in whatever
they become conditioned.
They do. They become conditioned to that level of behavior, and then it isn't offensive or doesn't violate their moral compass in any regard. And that's the danger of having somebody work you see too deep for too long.
Like we said, they all came out damaged.
Always.
And, the other thing, again, from management side, I've seen is some of these agencies and some of these organizations, what they do is they have a very, it's very easier for them to rely 100% on the role of the UC to dictate the course of the investigation. So let's go back to this case of, let's do a Donnie Brasco. So Donnie Brasco is getting himself into some things that we start saying, this is not good. This is not right. Maybe a little bit of criminal fringy going on. And instead of a supervisor doing what they're supposed to do and stepping in and saying, Detective J, too much. I know that you're going to hate me. And you ask my guys, and some of them are going to tell you that they probably MF'd me for a good day or two when I shut down some of our investigations. But that's your job. That's your role to step in when you see things, because you're detached. When you're the UC, you're immersed. You're in it. You become, again, I think you become conditioned to some things.
Conditioned and anesthetized to that
Anesthetized, that's the word I was looking for too.
It becomes a situation of the tail wagging the dog instead of the other way around. Yeah. And by the time that situation usually presents, your UC guy is very convincing. So he's going to be a great salesman because he succeeds and she succeeds because they have the ability to be that salesperson. Yeah. They can sell. So I could sell my boss almost everything I wanted.
I was just thinking the same thing. The best UCs, you can be sitting at your desk having the mindset that this thing's done. I'm shutting it down. You get the UC across your desk, and after like 20 minutes, you're thinking, well, all right, maybe we'll let it go
right.
longer.
And one of my early assignments, I could only be in there 2 years. I had to transfer out. So I got real busy the last 2-3 months of my time because I felt I could sell to my boss and my chief that I was too valuable in these things.
To let go.
So that was the only way I knew to do it.
Right.
And so right up until the day that I was ready to transfer out, I even had to go back and get a patrol haircut or a canine haircut. I can't remember which assignment I was going to. And then they extended me another year. And surprisingly, I found out that after I cleaned up, I was able to buy on a higher level within the organization that I was working because I was more presentable. I looked like I had more money instead of, a more street to middle management. I was more middle management to upper management. And so I had a real short haircut, but I had the ability, I had the same bullshit. So I had the ability to spin the same tail, but I just looked more presentable spinning it.
God, how funny. And again, Jay, we could tell stories about Jay and get into specifics about things. He's got a lot of good stories, but I think we're trying to focus on the UC aspect and how it affects your life. So we've talked about, what typical UC work is going to be, the dangers. We talked about what the whole deep, true immersion, 100% life. Neither of us are big proponents of that. And I think the last thing that I wanted to kind of touch on was there's actually another question. And this came from a guy. Well, I'm assuming it's a guy, I don't know, but it's Sethro Drool off of Instagram. And he said, how do we deal with having drugs presented to us while in undercover narcotics? And I thought it kind of tailed into this discussion as well. So, Jay, if you want to start off on that one.
That's a good question, Sethro Drool. It's awkward. It's just really awkward. And I knew when I was in patrol in the FTO program for 3 years before I transferred. I tested for and was transferred to an undercover assignment. And that was the one property related. But again, within a week, it was drug involved too. So they hooked me up with the narc. And the narc was explaining to me, here's the things you can and can't do. Part of that was, it's pretty easy to simulate smoking a joint by, pinching it, blowing gently on it. It kind of lights the amber up, and then, you pull it away from your mouth and you inhale like you just took a big hit off it. What you couldn't do, it's impossible to simulate smoking a bong or a pipe because your lighter or your match, the flame is going straight up and you draw the air through it and it comes down, so. The way to avoid that is just to get away from it. Away with it is don't do it because you're going to get drunk. Go ahead.
And let me back you up.
Yeah.
Can you ingest drugs? So if you're offered drugs, would there be a situation where you can ingest them?
If my life is at risk and I was in jeopardy of, we've had this discussion many times, and the scenario is if somebody puts a gun to my head, am I going to do a line of coke? Absolutely. I'm going to do the drugs. I'm not going to inject the heroin because I might die. I'm, in this world of fentanyl, I'm not hitting a fentanyl pill or something like that. But, if somebody is shoving a gun in my face and saying, smoke this weed, well, now they didn't care. Weed's legal here, and, but something else. The county attorney at the time I was working in drugs said, you can do it. It's not, we don't have any violation. The county attorney didn't have any policy that said that we wouldn't prosecute. Matter of fact, at the time I had many discussions with the prosecutors said, we're surprised you guys can buy drugs without doing them.
Right.
But
that's a testament to how good undercover
guys
can
it
be.
is.
Yeah.
But administratively, no, I could not.
Right.
And I've worked narcotics when they didn't have drug testing. It was quite some time ago, at the early part of my career, and then when they did have random drug testing. So you could, and I've done deals in California where I was in San Diego having these conversations with San Diego guys, and they were like, we do it all the time. Back in the day. Now they've probably shifted away from doing back like they did, but in the early days, there was a lot of that going on, and departments would, other agents from other departments that we would work joint task or cases together. They were always amazed that our department was very rigid and very clean, and I don't know anybody that did. And I'm not saying that didn't happen, but the whole concept or the whole idea of how to get around that is to, again, try to think 2 or 3 steps in front of being presented with, that situation. And if you can't think that far ahead and you walk into a house and there's some coke cut out on the table or some meth or something, it would be a matter of, I have to have a P test for work. I have to have my probation officer, is testing me today. You always come up with some bullshit story. You can't do it. That's the only way around it.
But the bottom line is you got to be able to talk your way out of it.
You have to be able to. That's
the crux of 90%.
Yeah, and sometimes it's very difficult. I remember I've been in my car, with somebody shoving the pinky, finger under my nose full of coke, for me to snort coke. And, you're blowing it off, and then you pull your nose away, you're wiping your nose like you got a good hit. Meanwhile, they're checking their pinky and it's still full of coke, shoving it back under your nose. And eventually you just, point down the road and cop, kind of like squirrel, point down the road and they divert their attention and you end up just blowing it. It's real difficult to blow hard enough to get it off a mirror, depending on the size of a mirror. But, more often than not, whoever presented me with coke or meth in the lines, they go, well, what are we going to do about the second line there? I go, well, you can have it if you want. I can't do it. And they were really grateful not having to put it back in the bag or the bindle or whatever.
And not having to share.
Yeah. They loved it. They thought I was, the best customer in the world.
So, it comes down, again, you got to be able to BS your way out of that stuff, but it also comes back to establishing a comfort level with that person that you're with. Because once they become comfortable with you, then they'll buy your BS all day long. They don't even worry about it.
They don't even care.
No.
My experience is they don't really want to be your friend anyway. So it's not like you're going to sit around and smoke a bowl together or smoke, do coke and go out dancing. They want to just get in, get out, and do business and move on. So once you get over maybe that first or second time that they're trying to push their, drugs off on you to make sure that you've done dope, with them, whatever it may be, their comfort level is okay. Yeah. But more often than not, if I had an informant that had brought me to them, they will probably reach out to the informant behind your back and say, you ever partied with that guy? Have you ever done any drugs? And they're always vouching for you. Oh, yeah, all the time. He's a big cokehead. He's crazy. Don't get him started. You can't turn him off.
Right.
So
to answer that, how do you deal with drugs being presented? So we've kind of touched on it. You avoid it. It's not really acceptable anywhere to ingest unless it's a life and death situation, which I think is pretty common sense. Now, like Jay said, I've had a guy that did some undercover and he was in some pretty nasty places and he's had a gun pointed at him a couple of times. And it was basically, you either smoke that rock or you stick that point in your arm and get high, or I'm going to shoot you and kill you right here and now. And again, luckily he's basically a guy like Jay. He's one of the best I ever worked with. And he was able to BS his way out of that stuff without ingesting either time. The two that I'm really thinking of that really, from the boss perspective, because you don't know this until it's over and done and your UC comes and tells you, and basically you're about to poop your pants because you're like, oh my God, you never knew that was going on. But anyway, so it happens. I mean, it does happen.
It does.
And there's an instance, I know of a couple instances where guys were forced to ingest. And I think in both of those, I think the undercover I don't want to say whether they're a great undercover or they're not, and that led to them not being able to get out of it. But the bottom line was they felt that their life was in jeopardy, and they ingested.
They do. And you and I know one of the same situations we're talking, I think you're referring to. And in that case, the mistake was made that it wasn't divulged to his supervisor. It was narc to narc, and then one narc went to another agency, and it worked its way all the way up to, and then it went chief to chief, and then it came back down. And then, and the problem, it wasn't a big problem. It wouldn't have been a big problem.
Wouldn't have been.
Because all that detective had to do was call the county attorney and say, this is what happened. He said, write a supplement to that, fix your report. He didn't deny that it didn't happen. He just didn't include it. And then it was a non-issue. It was no big deal.
Right. And again, from the perspective of your undercover, it's a safety and health issue. Because, I would tell, again, in conversations that you would have, I would tell my UC people, hey, if this ever happens, you got to tell me. I mean, let's worry about administrative, BS later. My biggest concern is if you just had to do, if you just had to smoke some of that nasty freaking meth, or, God forbid, anything that involved, intravenous stuff, I don't even think I'd do it then. I think I'd basically say, kill me then.
Yeah.
But if that occurred, I want to get you to the hospital. I want to go get you checked out and make sure that you don't die.
My biggest concerns and problems during my undercover years were alcohol related, because you can drink booze, and our department was fine. They had limits on certain amounts you could drink. Sure. And occasionally we would shut the jail down and go in there and take an intoxilizer so we would know where we, stood in our consumption versus our BAC, but I've been driven home a few times too, by a sober boss who, would recognize that I might not should be driving home.
Right.
And I wished you would have walked me in the door, because on those occasions I usually couldn't get in the door, and my poor wife would be woke up at 2 a.m, greeting her husband coming home from work, where, when you're in a bar all night, you can't go to the parking lot and smoke a joint all night, and you're there all night, you tend to consume, maybe more than you should.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it grows on you.
It does.
I mean, you can start stone sober and you can start really good at regulating your, 1 drink per hour-ish, but it builds. And as it builds, that's the whole point. You lose your reasoning.
Well, it not only builds through the night, it builds through your tenure in the assignment, because you're in these environments more often than not, and you feel like, oh, I can handle another one.
You've been doing it for 2 years.
Exactly.
I'm super narc, man.
I'm fine.
I got it.
I can do this. So.
I got it.
Yeah.
Done it before, I'll do it again.
Yeah.
But that's a great point. Is it alcohol? Yeah.
I actually think alcohol probably does in more narcs than any of the drug, information or any of the drug use issues that Seth Rule wanted to know about.
No, and you know what? God, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because you can bring up the issues with the stuff that is technically illegal and the dangers and the this and that's. But if you want to talk about what truly affects and probably ends some of those careers, it is alcohol.
It is
You're
alcohol.
right. You're absolutely right.
Whether it's undercover or just personal life use.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, it's a clouder of good judgment. So.
Yeah. Great point. Look at you. Look at the big brain on Jay.
Big brain on Jay.
That's why I got you here. So I know we've gone pretty long here. This is a really long episode, and we've touched on a lot of the UC stuff, and I think we've hit it pretty well.
I think so.
The bottom line is that it's a dangerous job. It's definitely not for everybody. It's a pretty amazing skill set for the guys that are really good at it, and to watch them function and work. It's not like TV. It's not like the movies. There's not nearly as many dirty undercover cops out there as you'd think there are. Most of these guys they're good cops. They want to do they're hard chargers, and they want to close those cases. And usually they're the kind that I refer to as, I got to rein you back instead of kick you in the ass to get you to work. I mean, that's how those people function. They're some hard workers. But I hope we touched everything. And if, again, I'll throw it out. If you have any questions on something that's specific to the things that we've discussed, well, then feel free to reach back out. And I'm hoping that Jay and I will do another episode on, some other comments that people have for us as well.
Yeah, no, that's fun. I'm glad.
It is kind of fun.
Your listeners submitted these, because, for us, we kind of take it for granted that when we did it, everybody knows how it's done.
Right.
So this was nice to have a chance to kind of break it down.
Right. And our everyday experience could be somebody's once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, guys. So with that, I'm going to close this episode of I Barely Got Here. I'm going to thank you for listening. And if you like the show, please subscribe and post a review. And you can ask your friends to give it a listen as well. If you have any questions or comments, shoot me an email at ibarelyGotHere@gmail.com, and you can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And I will also try to give you guys a heads up when that podcast comes out, that True Crime Arizona podcast, so you can give that a listen as well. And I think it's going to be on the local news also, a little snippet, but we'll see what happens. So again, with that, Sam 42.
And I'll be King 410 today.
R107.